2 hours remained before the hegemony fleet would achieve orbital position around Earth, and General Zix Thera stood in his command center feeling more uncertain than at any point in his military career. His comprehensive review of human warfare capabilities had revealed a species far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. But it was too late to abort the mission now. 200 hegemony warships were already committed to the invasion. The general tried to convince himself that superior technology would overcome human determination and tactical skill. After all, the hegemony possessed energy weapons, force, shields, faster-than-light travel, and other technologies that humans could not match. Surely these advantages would prove decisive in any conflict. This final hope shattered when Intelligence Officer Vexnil approached his command station with a datapad containing the most disturbing information yet discovered. "Sir," she said quietly, "our deep scan analysis of Earth's electromagnetic spectrum has revealed several anomalies that require your immediate attention." Zix Thera accepted the datapad with growing dread. What he read there made his 6 eyes widen in shock and his 4 hands tremble with fear. "The humans have been monitoring our communications," Vexenil continued. "Our long-range scouts reported occasional signal intercepts over the past 6 months, but we assumed these were accidental discoveries of our transmissions. The evidence suggests otherwise. The intelligence report showed systematic analysis of hegemony communication protocols, fleet movements, and tactical doctrine. Human monitoring stations had been tracking the approaching fleet since it entered their solar system. They had recorded radio transmissions, analyzed ship configurations, and apparently decoded significant portions of hegemony military communications." "How is this possible?" Zix Thera demanded. "Our encryption systems are far beyond their technological capabilities." "That appears to be incorrect, sir," Vexnil replied. "Human computational systems are more advanced than our initial assessments indicated. They have developed what they call quantum computers and artificial intelligence systems. Their code-breaking capabilities approach our own." The general studied detailed scans of Earth's surface, looking for signs of military preparation. What he found exceeded his worst fears. Massive troop movements were occurring on every continent. Military bases that had appeared inactive were suddenly bustling with activity. Aircraft that intelligence had classified as civilian transports were revealed to be military platforms in disguise. The radio silence we detected was not surrender, he realized with growing horror. It was operational security. They stopped using standard military frequencies to prevent us from monitoring their preparations. Satellite imagery showed construction projects that had been dismissed as civilian infrastructure, underground facilities that extended for kilometers, beneath major cities, hardened command bunkers that could survive direct nuclear strikes, weapons production facilities hidden inside seemingly innocent manufacturing plants. But it was the space-based assets that truly terrified Zix Thera. Objects that reconnaissance had classified as communications satellites were revealed to be weapons platforms. The humans had been quietly militarizing their orbital space for decades, disguising military systems as civilian technology. "Sir," Vexnil said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there is something else. We have detected energy signatures consistent with experimental weapon systems. The humans appear to be testing technologies that should be beyond their scientific capabilities." The intelligence report included readings from high-energy particle accelerators, fusion reactors, and electromagnetic pulse generators. Humans were experimenting with directed energy weapons, railguns, and other advanced systems. They had achieved these breakthroughs while maintaining the appearance of technological primitiveness. Zix Thera realized that everything the hegemony thought they knew about human capabilities was wrong. The primitive chemical weapons and simple tactics were not limitations but camouflage. Humans had been deliberately concealing their true military potential while studying their potential enemies. "How long have they known we were coming?" he asked. "Based on the timing of their preparation activities, approximately 18 months, Vexnil replied. "They have been using that time to unify their military forces, improve their weapons systems, and develop specific countermeasures for hegemony technology." The general's 4 hands clenched into fists as he absorbed this information. Humans had not just detected the approaching fleet, They had spent over a year preparing for war. They had studied hegemony tactics, analyzed their weaknesses, and developed strategies specifically designed to counter superior technology. But the most disturbing revelation came when Vexnil activated a holographic display showing human command structures. The dozens of separate nation-states that had been fighting each other for centuries had suddenly unified under a single military command. Ancient enemies were now sharing resources, intelligence, and technology. They call it the Earth Defense Alliance, she explained. Every major military power on the planet has contributed forces to a unified command structure. They have appointed their most experienced combat veterans to leadership positions. Zixathera studied the personnel files of human military leaders and felt his confidence evaporate completely. These were not political appointees or ceremonial figures. They were combat veterans who had commanded forces in every type of warfare their species had developed. General Kate Sullivan had led special operations forces in 3 different conflicts. Admiral Ryan Parker had commanded naval battle groups in hostile waters. Air Marshal Linda Davis had planned and executed complex air campaigns. These humans had spent their entire careers studying warfare and leading soldiers in combat. But it was the psychological profiles that disturbed the general. Most human military leaders showed consistent patterns of aggressive thinking, tactical innovation, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. They had been selected specifically for their ability to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure. Sir, Vexenil continued, we have also detected something called Project Aegis. Our analysis suggests this is a planetary defense network that has been under development for several years. The intelligence files revealed a sophisticated system of orbital platforms, ground-based missile batteries, and early warning sensors. Humans had built a multi-layered defense network designed to engage threats from space. The system was far more advanced than anything hegemony intelligence had detected, but the most chilling discovery was buried deep in classified human military archives. Contingency plans labeled Broken Arrow and Scorched Earth Protocol detailed procedures for total warfare that exceeded anything in hegemony doctrine. These were not plans for military victory, but for ensuring that any conqueror would find nothing of value on Earth. Humans had prepared to destroy their own cities, industrial facilities, and even agricultural areas rather than allow them to fall into enemy hands. They had weaponized their own planet against invasion. The Scorched Earth Protocol was particularly disturbing. If conventional resistance failed, human forces would detonate nuclear weapons in their own population centers, poison their water, supplies, and burn their forests. They would render their world uninhabitable rather than accept conquest. This is madness, Zixathera whispered as he read the operational details. They are prepared to destroy their own civilization to deny it to us. It appears to be consistent with their historical behavior, Vexnil replied. Human forces have repeatedly chosen destruction over surrender throughout their military history. The general's communication system suddenly activated, displaying an incoming transmission on standard hegemony frequencies. The signal was crystal clear and broadcast on the exact frequency used for fleet command communications. Someone on Earth was using their own equipment to contact them. Hegemony Fleet, this is Earth Defense Command, came a clear female voice, speaking perfect hegemony standard. I am Commander Kate Sullivan of the United Earth Forces. Your approach has been monitored since you entered our solar system. Zixathera's 6 eyes fixed on the communication display in shock. Not only were humans monitoring their approach, but they had learned to speak hegemony languages and were using their own communication protocols. You have 30 seconds to alter course and withdraw from Earth space, Sullivan continued. Any closer approach will be considered an act of war and will be met with appropriate force. The general looked at his tactical display, which showed the positions of his 200 warships approaching Earth orbit. These were vessels that had conquered 12 different worlds without serious resistance. Each ship carried enough firepower to reduce a planet's surface to molten rock. But as he studied the tactical situation more carefully, he noticed something that made his exoskeleton shiver with fear. Small objects were moving from Earth toward his fleet. At first, he assumed they were primitive chemical rockets, but their acceleration profiles suggested much more advanced propulsion systems. Sir, His tactical officer reported, "We are detecting multiple launch signatures from Earth's surface. Initial analysis suggests these are not ballistic missiles but spacecraft with performance characteristics approaching our own." 12 hours remained until the hegemony fleet would reach Earth orbit, and General Zix Thara felt his confidence crumbling with each passing moment. His review of human military history had revealed a species far more dangerous than initial intelligence suggested. But he told himself that historical conflicts, no matter how impressive, were still primitive by hegemony standards. Surely modern human military capabilities could not pose a serious threat to his advanced fleet. This final hope died when he began studying contemporary human warfare and their mastery of asymmetric tactics. The general activated his personal analysis station and accessed the most recent intelligence files on human military operations. What he found there made his exoskeleton shiver with growing dread. These were not the primitive chemical weapons and simple tactics he had expected. Human warfare had evolved into something sophisticated and terrifying. He began with their space program, thinking it would demonstrate their technological limitations. Instead, he discovered humans who had launched themselves into space using controlled explosions, landed on their moon through precise calculations and raw determination, and built permanent orbital installations while dodging debris and radiation. The Apollo 13 mission particularly disturbed him. When a critical system failure left 3 humans stranded between Earth and the Moon with failing life support, they had improvised solutions using spare parts and manual calculations. Ground control teams worked for days without sleep to develop procedures that had never been tested. The crew had performed complex repairs in freezing conditions while their spacecraft tumbled through space. They had not panicked or accepted death. Instead, they had treated the crisis as an engineering problem to be solved. Mission Commander Jim Lovell had reportedly said, "Failure is not an option," and somehow they had brought their crippled spacecraft home safely. This demonstrated a combination of technical skill, psychological resilience, and innovative thinking that impressed even hegemony engineers. But it was their recent military operations that truly frightened Zix Thara. He studied the raid that eliminated human terrorist leader Osama bin Laden. The operation required flying stealth helicopters hundreds of kilometers into hostile territory, conducting a precision assault on a defended compound, and extracting before enemy forces could respond. The planning had taken months and involved multiple intelligence agencies, special forces units, and support elements. They had built full-scale replicas of the target compound and rehearsed the assault dozens of times. When one helicopter crashed during the actual operation, the team had improvised new extraction procedures and completed their mission successfully. This was not primitive warfare. This was a military operation that rivaled anything in hegemony, special forces doctrine. The coordination, precision, and adaptability demonstrated capabilities that the general had not believed possible for a species that still used chemical propulsion. He studied more recent conflicts in places called Iraq and Afghanistan, watching human forces adapt to insurgency warfare in real time. These conflicts revealed the true evolution of human military thinking. Their enemies used improvised explosive devices, suicide attacks, and guerrilla tactics specifically designed to counter superior technology and firepower. The humans had responded by completely revolutionizing their approach to warfare. They developed new detection equipment for improvised explosives. They created armored vehicles specifically designed to protect occupants from blast effects. They trained their forces in cultural awareness, language skills, and counterinsurgency tactics. But most importantly, they had learned to think like their enemies. Human special forces had adopted the same tactics used against them: small unit operations, intelligence gathering, precision strikes, and psychological warfare. They had become insurgents, fighting insurgents. The general read detailed reports of American forces operating in the mountains of Afghanistan. Teams of 8 to 12 soldiers would deploy to remote locations for weeks at a time, gathering intelligence and hunting high-value targets. They moved through terrain that challenged even their mountain-adapted enemies, using night vision equipment and satellite communications to coordinate with support elements hundreds of kilometers away. These human soldiers carried individual equipment that approached hegemony standards. Advanced optical systems, encrypted communications, body armor that could stop high-velocity projectiles, and weapons capable of engaging targets at extreme range. Each soldier was essentially a mobile sensor platform capable of directing artillery, airstrikes, or reinforcement with pinpoint accuracy. But it was their mindset that disturbed Zixthara most. He read after-action reports describing human soldiers continuing to fight after being wounded, carrying their injured comrades to safety under enemy fire, and completing missions despite overwhelming odds. They seemed to view death as an acceptable risk rather than an outcome to be avoided at all costs. The Battle of Roberts Ridge demonstrated this mentality perfectly. When a helicopter insertion went wrong, leaving a small team of humans surrounded on a mountaintop, they had fought for hours against superior numbers. They called for artillery and air support while engaging enemies at close range. When rescue forces arrived, they found Americans who had continued fighting until their ammunition was exhausted. The rescue operation itself showed typical human problem-solving under pressure. Multiple helicopters had been damaged or destroyed, attempting to reach the isolated team. Ground forces had advanced through enemy positions in daylight across open terrain. They had accepted significant casualties to rescue a small number of their comrades. This behavior was completely outside hegemony military doctrine. Logical forces would have withdrawn when the cost exceeded the benefit. Humans seemed to operate according to different calculations entirely. They placed value on individual lives that defied mathematical analysis. Zixthara studied human naval operations and discovered capabilities that rivaled hegemony space forces. Their aircraft carriers were mobile bases that could project power anywhere on their planet. These massive ships carried dozens of advanced aircraft, precision weapons, and sophisticated sensor systems. A single carrier battle group could engage targets on land, sea, air, and space simultaneously. They used satellite navigation, real-time intelligence, and coordinated strikes to eliminate threats hundreds of kilometers away. The coordination between ships, aircraft, and support elements demonstrated organizational capabilities that impressed even hegemony fleet commanders. But it was their submarine forces that truly worried the general. Human submarines could remain submerged for months, moving silently through the depths of their oceans while carrying weapons capable of destroying entire continents. These vessels operated independently, thousands of kilometers from support, relying on their crews to make life-or-death decisions without direct communication. The psychological requirements for submarine service were extraordinary. Humans volunteered to spend months in cramped metal cylinders beneath crushing depths, knowing that a single equipment failure could kill everyone aboard. They performed complex technical procedures in conditions that would challenge most species' sanity. Nuclear submarine operations required crews to work with barely contained atomic reactions while submerged beneath kilometers of water. These humans had mastered technologies that the hegemony used only in heavily shielded space installations. They treated nuclear power as routine equipment rather than an exotic technology. The general studied human pilot training and discovered programs that rivaled hegemony aerospace academies. Military pilots underwent years of instruction in physics, engineering, tactics, and survival skills. They learned to operate in conditions ranging from sea level to the edge of space, day or night, in any weather. Fighter pilots trained to engage multiple targets simultaneously while flying at speeds that subjected their bodies to forces that would incapacitate most species. They made split-second decisions involving complex physics calculations while pulling maneuvers that pushed their aircraft and themselves to the limits of physical endurance. But it was their test pilot programs that amazed Zixthara. These humans volunteered to fly experimental aircraft that frequently killed their pilots. They broke barriers of speed and altitude while testing vehicles that existed only in theoretical form. Chuck Yeager had broken the sound barrier in an aircraft that no one was certain would survive the attempt. The Space Shuttle program demonstrated similar willingness to accept risk in pursuit of advancement. Humans had built reusable spacecraft using technologies that were barely understood. When shuttles exploded during launch or re-entry, killing entire crews, other humans had volunteered to continue the program. This was not reckless behavior but calculated risk acceptance. Human engineers had analyzed failure modes, developed safety procedures, and trained crews to handle emergencies. When disasters occurred, they investigated, learned, and improved rather than abandoning their efforts. Contemporary human special forces represented the pinnacle of their military evolution. Units like Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, and Special Air Service underwent selection processes that eliminated over 90% of candidates. 24 hours remained before the hegemony fleet would reach Earth orbit. General Zixathera had spent most of the previous day reviewing ancient human military history, and what he learned had shaken his confidence considerably. But he told himself that ancient warfare was primitive and irrelevant to modern conflicts. Surely contemporary humans had evolved beyond their violent ancestors. This hope died quickly when he began studying human military developments from the past 2 centuries. The general sat in his private quarters surrounded by holographic displays showing human conflicts from their industrial age forward. What he saw there was not a species growing more peaceful with technological advancement. Instead, he witnessed warfare evolving into something far more sophisticated and terrifying than anything their ancestors had imagined. Human conflicts called world wars had involved entire planetary populations in total warfare. The scale alone was staggering. Millions of soldiers fighting simultaneously across multiple continents. Entire economies converted to military production. Civilian populations mobilized to support massive military machines. The humans had not just fought these wars. They had reinvented their entire civilization to support them. Zixathera studied something called the Blitzkrieg, where German forces had coordinated tanks, aircraft, and infantry in lightning-fast campaigns that conquered most of Europe within months. The speed and efficiency rivaled anything in hegemony tactical doctrine. But what impressed him most was how quickly other human armies had adapted to counter these tactics. The Battle of Stalingrad showed him human warfare at its most brutal. 2 massive armies had fought street by street, building by building, room by room through an entire city. The fighting continued for months in conditions that would have broken most species. Soldiers battled in sewers, factories, and bombed out ruins. Neither side would retreat. When winter came, both armies fought in temperatures that dropped below 40 degrees Celsius. Humans froze to death at their weapons positions but were immediately replaced by other humans who continued the fight. The general read accounts of soldiers continuing to fight with frostbitten hands that could barely hold their weapons. The final German surrender came only after over 1 million casualties on both sides. The city was completely destroyed, but the Russian humans had held their ground. They had chosen to see their city reduced to rubble rather than allow their enemies to claim victory. But it was the Pacific theater that truly disturbed Zixathera. He studied the island-hopping campaign where American forces had fought Japanese defenders on dozens of small islands. Each battle followed the same pattern. Japanese forces would fight to the death rather than surrender, and American forces would accept horrific casualties to capture strategic positions. The Battle of Iwo Jima particularly caught his attention. On an island less than 8 kilometers long, over 22,000 Japanese defenders and 7,000 American attackers died in 36 days of fighting. The Japanese had built elaborate tunnel systems and fought from hidden positions. They had no hope of victory or rescue, but they continued fighting until virtually every defender was dead. The Americans, knowing they faced certain death, continued their assault. Marines charged machine gun positions across open ground. They used flamethrowers to clear caves and bunkers. They advanced meter by meter through volcanic sand while under constant fire from hidden enemies. What amazed the general was that both sides had displayed the same characteristics: absolute refusal to surrender, tactical innovation under pressure, and willingness to die for strategic objectives. This suggested that extreme military determination was not unique to one human culture, but was somehow inherent in the entire species. He studied the development of human air power during these conflicts. At the beginning of their world wars, humans were flying fabric-covered biplanes with machine guns mounted on the wings. By the end, they had developed jet fighters, strategic bombers, and guided missiles. The rate of technological advancement, during active warfare was extraordinary. The atomic bomb project fascinated and terrified him. Humans had developed weapons capable of destroying entire cities while simultaneously fighting a global war. The Manhattan Project had employed over 100,000 people and cost more than $20 billion in their currency. They had built these weapons not knowing if they would work, based entirely on theoretical physics. But it was not just the weapons themselves that concerned Zix Thara. It was the willingness to use them. American leaders had ordered atomic attacks on Japanese cities knowing they would kill hundreds of thousands of civilians. They had made this decision to avoid the casualties that would result from invading the Japanese home islands. The general read intelligence estimates suggesting that an invasion of Japan would have cost over 1 million American casualties and potentially 10 million Japanese deaths. The humans had chosen to end the war with atomic weapons rather than accept these losses. This was strategic thinking on a scale that impressed even hegemony military planners. Post-war human conflicts showed continued evolution of military doctrine. The Korean War demonstrated human willingness to fight in frozen mountains against overwhelming odds. American and Chinese forces had battled in temperatures approaching 50 degrees below zero. Soldiers had died from frostbite as often as from enemy action. But the fighting continued for 3 years. Vietnam revealed something even more disturbing. Humans who adapted to guerrilla warfare in jungle environments. American forces had used helicopters, chemical weapons, and advanced sensors to fight an enemy that moved like ghosts through dense vegetation. The conflict had lasted over a decade and demonstrated human persistence even in unwinnable situations. But it was more recent conflicts that truly worried the general. He studied American military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, watching human forces adapt to urban warfare, improvised explosive devices, and insurgency tactics in real time. These were not the primitive chemical weapons he had expected to find. Human forces used precision-guided munitions, satellite navigation, real-time intelligence, and coordinated air support. Their individual soldiers carried electronic equipment that would not have been out of place in a hegemony infantry unit. Night vision systems, encrypted communications, body armor, and weapons that could engage targets at extreme range. But it was their tactical doctrine that impressed him most. Small unit operations where teams of 8 to 12 humans operated independently behind enemy lines for weeks. These teams could call for artillery, airstrikes, or reinforcement from units hundreds of kilometers away. The coordination and communication capabilities rivaled hegemony special forces. Zix Thara read after-action reports from battles in places called Fallujah and Kandahar. Human forces had fought building-to-building urban combat against enemies who knew the terrain and had months to prepare defenses. The Americans had developed new tactics, weapons, and equipment specifically for these conditions. What disturbed him was how quickly they learned and adapted. Intelligence reports showed human forces modifying their equipment and tactics based on lessons learned from previous battles. They shared information instantaneously across their entire military, through electronic networks. The general studied human military academies and training centers. Places like West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy produced officers who studied not just current tactics, but the entire history of warfare. They learned from Spartan phalanxes, Mongol cavalry, Roman legions, and modern tank battles. Human, enlisted personnel underwent training that was designed to simulate combat stress and create muscle memory for life-threatening situations. They practiced medical procedures, equipment maintenance, and tactical movements until these actions became automatic responses. The training was specifically designed to prepare them for situations where rational thought might be impossible. Special Forces training was even more intensive. Units like Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Force Recon underwent selection processes that eliminated over 90% of candidates. Those who survived were trained to operate in any environment on their planet, underwater, in deserts, jungles, mountains, or Arctic conditions. The general read accounts of SEAL Team 6 operations that demonstrated capabilities he had not believed possible for biological organisms. Humans who could hold their breath underwater for over 10 minutes. Soldiers who could march 50 kilometers carrying heavy equipment. Teams that could parachute into enemy territory, complete complex missions, and extract without being detected. But What truly frightened Zixathera was the human approach to casualties. Their military doctrine accepted that soldiers would die in combat and planned accordingly. They trained medics to perform surgery under fire. They developed evacuation procedures to remove wounded personnel from active battlefields. They prepared their forces mentally and emotionally for the reality of warfare. This was not the behavior of a primitive species stumbling through conflicts. This was a military machine refined through centuries of warfare and innovation. Humans had studied every aspect of combat and developed sophisticated solutions for each challenge. As he concluded his review of human military capabilities, sleep did not come easily to General Zixathera that night. The silence from Earth's military forces continued to bother him in ways he could not fully explain. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered a species that simply stopped communicating when faced with superior force. Most either surrendered immediately or began frantic preparations for hopeless resistance. Unable to rest, the general made his way to the ship's intelligence center. The vast room hummed with activity as banks of computers processed data streams from across the galaxy. Hegemony intelligence gathering was thorough and methodical. Before conquering any world, they collected every available piece of information about the target species. Zixathera settled into a private analysis booth and began reviewing the complete file on human military history. What he found in those records made his 6 eyes widen with growing concern. The first thing that struck him was the sheer scope of human warfare. These creatures had been fighting each other continuously for over 5,000 years of recorded history. But it was not just the frequency of their conflicts that disturbed him. It was how they fought. He studied a battle called Thermopylae, where 300 human warriors called Spartans faced an army of several 100,000 invaders. According to hegemony military doctrine, the logical response would be immediate surrender followed by negotiations for favorable terms. Instead, the Spartans chose to fight to the death. They held a narrow mountain pass for 3 days against impossible odds, killing thousands of enemies before finally being overwhelmed. The general's mandibles clicked nervously as he read the historical account. What kind of species chose certain death over strategic retreat? The Spartan leader, when told that enemy arrows would block out the sun, reportedly replied that they would fight in the shade. This was not rational military thinking. He moved forward in time to study human siege warfare. The siege of Leningrad particularly disturbed him. For 872 days, human civilians and soldiers endured starvation, disease, and constant bombardment rather than surrender their city. They ate leather boots, wallpaper paste, and anything remotely edible. Over 1 million humans died, but the city never fell. Zixathera had to pause his reading to process this information. In hegemony culture, prolonged suffering was illogical when surrender remained an option. These humans seemed to view death as preferable to defeat. This was not the behavior of a rational species. The records showed similar patterns throughout human history. Celtic warriors who painted their bodies blue and charged Roman legions while screaming. Viking raiders who believed dying in battle guaranteed entry to their warrior heaven. Japanese samurai who preferred ritual suicide to the dishonor of defeat. But it was not just their willingness to die that concerned the general. It was their ability to learn and adapt. He found detailed accounts of human armies studying their enemies, copying successful tactics and improving upon them. The Mongol Empire particularly fascinated and worried him. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols had started as simple horsemen from the grasslands, but as they conquered different peoples, they absorbed their knowledge and techniques. Chinese siege engineers taught them how to build catapults and siege towers. Persian administrators showed them how to organize vast territories. Arab scholars shared their mathematical and scientific knowledge. Within a few generations, the Mongols had transformed from tribal raiders into the largest land empire in history. They had not just conquered their enemies. They had become them, taking the best aspects of each culture and incorporating them into their own military machine. Zixathera found similar patterns repeated throughout human history. Roman legions adopting Germanic weapons and tactics. European armies learning gunpowder technology from the Chinese. American revolutionaries using guerrilla warfare learned from Native American tribes. The general's unease grew as he realized what this meant. Humans did not just fight wars. They evolved through warfare. Each conflict made them stronger, smarter, and more dangerous. They seemed to view every defeat as a learning opportunity, rather than a final outcome. He pulled up records of more recent, human conflicts. The Battle of Britain showed human pilots fighting overwhelming odds in the skies above their homeland. When their government official Winston Churchill spoke to the nation, he did not promise easy victory. Instead, he promised blood, toil, tears, and sweat. The humans cheered. The Pacific theater of their Second World War revealed even more disturbing patterns. On islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Japanese defenders fought to the death rather than surrender. But the American attackers showed equal determination, taking horrific casualties to capture strategic positions. Both sides seemed to accept massive losses as the price of victory. But what truly worried Zixthera was how quickly humans innovated during wartime. Their technological development accelerated exponentially when facing existential threats. Radar, jet engines, rocket technology, electronic computers, nuclear weapons, all developed during active warfare. The Manhattan Project particularly caught his attention. In less than 4 years, humans had gone from theoretical physics to weapons, capable of destroying entire cities. They had accomplished this while simultaneously fighting a global war on multiple continents. The speed of innovation was unprecedented in hegemony experience. He studied the tactical evolution of human forces during their world wars. Tank warfare, combined arms operations, strategic bombing, amphibious assaults, special operations, humans, had revolutionized military doctrine while actively engaged in combat. They did not just use existing weapons, they invented entirely new forms of warfare. The general's 4 hands trembled slightly as he read about human special forces operations. Groups like the British SAS, American Rangers, and Soviet Spetsnaz conducted missions that seemed impossible even by hegemony standards. Operating behind enemy lines for weeks, these humans gathered intelligence, sabotaged infrastructure, and eliminated high-value targets with minimal support. What disturbed him most was not their technical capabilities, but their mindset. Human. Soldiers underwent training specifically designed to break them mentally and physically, then rebuild them into more effective warriors. They practiced for scenarios where retreat was impossible and death was likely. They trained to keep fighting even when wounded, exhausted, and outnumbered. Zixthera found records of a human military academy called West Point, where young officers learned not just tactics and strategy but something called duty, honor, country. They studied historical battles not just to learn what worked, but to understand the character traits that led to victory under impossible circumstances. The more he read, the more concerned he became. This was not a primitive species that happened to be good at fighting. This was a species that had been forged by warfare, shaped by conflict, and perfected through generations of military evolution. As dawn approached on the void render, General Zixthera finally closed the intelligence files. The peaceful blue planet in the holographic display no longer looked quite so defenseless. Somewhere on that world were descendants of Spartans, Mongols, Vikings, and countless other warrior cultures. They had inherited 5,000 years of military innovation and adaptation. For the first time in his career, the general began to wonder if the hegemony had chosen the wrong target for conquest. These humans did not think like any species he had ever encountered. They seemed to welcome conflict rather than avoid it. They improved through adversity rather than being weakened by it. But it was too late to change course now. The fleet was already committed to the invasion. All he could do was hope that human military history was not an accurate predictor of how they would respond to hegemony forces. Deep down, however, Zixthera suspected that hope might not be enough. General Zixthera stood in the center of the massive briefing room aboard the hegemony command ship, Void Render. His 6 eyes focused on the blue and green planet rotating slowly in the holographic display before him. Earth looked so peaceful from this distance, with white clouds swirling over vast oceans and brown continents. It seemed like such an easy target. The general's chitinous exoskeleton clicked softly as he shifted his weight. Around him, dozens of his best officers sat, in curved rows, their attention fixed on the same display. These were veterans who had helped him conquer 12 different worlds over the past 50 years. Each conquest had been swift and efficient. The hegemony way was simple: arrive with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and accept it when the locals realized resistance was pointless. Admiral Kethvar rose from his seat in the front row. His voice carried the confidence that came from years of successful campaigns. "The humans appear to be completely unprepared for our arrival," he said. "Our scouts report no orbital defense platforms, no energy shields protecting their major cities, and no unified planetary government. They are still using primitive chemical rockets to reach their own moon." Several officers made clicking sounds with their mandibles, the hegemony equivalent of laughter. How could a species that barely managed to leave their own atmosphere pose any threat to the most powerful military force in this section of the galaxy? Zixthara nodded approvingly. "What about their military capabilities?" he asked. "Primitive," Kethvar replied without hesitation. "They fight with metal projectiles, fired from simple chemical weapons. Their largest military vehicles are powered by burning fossil fuels. Most remarkably, they are constantly fighting among themselves. Our monitoring stations have recorded over 200 separate conflicts happening on their planet right now." Intelligence. Officer Vexnil stood up from her position near the back of the room. Her role was to analyze potential threats and find weaknesses in enemy defenses. She had performed this same function for every previous conquest. "Sir, I have been reviewing the data from our long-range surveillance," she said. "While the humans do appear technologically inferior, there are some unusual patterns in their behavior that might warrant further study." Zixthara turned his attention to her. Vexenil was thorough and careful, qualities that had served the fleet well in past campaigns. "Explain," he commanded. "The humans have been engaged in warfare continuously for their entire recorded history," she began. "This is not unusual among primitive species. However, their approach to combat shows some concerning trends. They appear to adapt their tactics and weapons with remarkable speed during active conflicts. Our archives show examples of human armies completely changing their fighting methods within single battles." Admiral Kethvar made a dismissive gesture with one of his forearms. "Desperation often drives innovation among inferior species," he said. "When we arrive with superior technology and overwhelming numbers, they will recognize the futility of resistance." Vexnil continued, despite the interruption. "There is another factor to consider. The humans seem to have an unusual relationship with defeat. Most species surrender when victory becomes mathematically impossible. Humans frequently continue fighting even when the logical outcome is certain death." The general considered this information. In his experience, every species had a breaking point. Present them with sufficient evidence of their inferiority, and rational beings would choose survival over pointless resistance. "Perhaps they simply need a clearer demonstration of our superiority," he said. The holographic display zoomed in to show Earth's surface in greater detail. Cities sprawled across continents connected by networks of roads and primitive aircraft. Billions of humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their planet was about to be conquered by a force beyond their comprehension. "How long do we estimate the campaign will take?" Zixthara asked. 3 days at most," replied Tactical Officer Quindar. "We will position the fleet in high orbit, broadcast surrender demands in all major human languages, and wait for their governments to respond. Our psychological warfare specialists predict immediate capitulation once they understand the futility of resistance." Zixthara walked closer to the holographic Earth. He had stood in similar briefing rooms before 12 previous conquests. Each time the pattern had been the same. Arrive, demonstrate superiority, accept surrender, establish hegemony rule. The humans would be no different. "Begin final approach preparations," he ordered. "All ships will maintain standard formation. Weapon systems will remain powered but not targeted. We want to appear strong but not immediately threatening. The humans should have time to make the rational choice. As his officers began filing out to prepare their respective departments, Vexnil approached the general's position. "Sir, there is one more thing," she said quietly. "Our communication monitoring stations detected something unusual 6 hours ago." "What kind of unusual?" "All human military radio transmissions ceased simultaneously across their entire planet. Every frequency they normally use for military communication went completely silent." Zixthara's 6 eyes fixed on her. In his experience, military silence usually meant one of two things: complete surrender or preparation for battle. Given what they knew about human psychology, surrender seemed unlikely. "Could this be a technical malfunction?" he asked. "Negative, sir. The cessation was too coordinated and complete. It happened at exactly the same moment across multiple time zones and different technological systems. This required planning and organization." The general stared at the peaceful blue planet rotating in front of him. For the first time since beginning this campaign, he felt a small tremor of uncertainty. "Continue monitoring all frequencies," he ordered. "Report any changes immediately." As Vexnil left the briefing room, Zixthara remained alone with the holographic Earth. The planet looked so small and defenseless, suspended in the darkness of space. His fleet of 200 warships could reduce its surface to molten slag within hours if necessary. Yet something about the sudden silence from human military forces made his exoskeleton itch with unease. He activated his personal communication device and contacted the fleet's chief weapons officer. "Ensure all primary batteries are fully charged and ready for immediate deployment," he said. "We may need to make a stronger first impression than originally planned." The reply came back within seconds. "All weapon systems are operating at peak efficiency, sir. We are ready for any contingency." Zixthara deactivated the communication link and continued staring at Earth. In 18 hours, his fleet would be in position to begin formal contact. If the humans were smart, they would surrender quickly and avoid unnecessary destruction. If they were not smart, they would learn why the hegemony had never lost a single planetary conquest. Either way, Earth would be part of the hegemony before the week ended. The general was certain of this fact, even as a small voice in the back of his mind wondered why an entire planet's military forces would suddenly stop talking to each other just as an alien fleet approached their world.